I'm Todd Jones, recovering from 30 years as a sports writer. Thanks for joining me as I sit down with some of the best sports writers of our time, who knew the greatest athletes and coaches and experienced firsthand some of the biggest sports moments of the past half century. We'll share stories behind the stories, some we've only told each other. Pull up a seat on Press Box Access.
One thing I miss from my years as a sports writer, the characters. And I don't necessarily mean some of the athletes and coaches. I'm talking about the writers. Characters found their way into the press box like ants to a peach. They came from all over. They had stories and they could tell them. Patrick Reusse is one of those characters. He's an absolute legend in the state of Minnesota, where he was born and raised and has been part of the sports media for 60 years. 60! You don't need to be a resident of the Twin Cities to appreciate Reusse. You'll feel right at home with him. Here's part one of our conversation. Hey, Pat, I've been looking forward to this opportunity to chat with you. Welcome.
Yes, it's taken a while for this hookup, and it took a while for me to actually get hooked up this morning, but outside of that, we're doing dang fine, so.
Hey, as long as we're hooked up, that's all that
right.
matters.
That's true.
That's all that matters. Hey, Pat, 60 years into business this year. Think about this.
See, well, yes, if I count my copy boy days, that's right. If I count my 3 years as the Minneapolis Tribune copy boy, that is 60 years. The first newspaper job was Duluth in 66, but the copy boy days, when you work 2.5 years for Sid Hartman, you learn a lot of stuff about what not to do.
Yeah.
So
we'll talk a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about Sid. I just wanted to clarify that you did not cover the first ancient Olympics, right?
No, I did not. I missed those. I think the marathon was the big event, though, as far as I recall. 18,
yeah.
Well, not the ancient ones, but where were the first ones ever? 1896, right? Wow.
I think that's right, yeah.
Mm-hmm. They did not have they did not have some of the events they have now, I would guess, back then. They did not have a half pipe. I don't think that existed there, a half pipe.
They did have rope climbing, I once saw.
Right. Bring back rope climbing. How about no baseball in the next Olympics, but break dancing is coming in. So that's...
I can see you break dancing, Reusse. I think I have seen it on the road.
Mm-hmm. Well, I needed a lot of Tanqueray a lot longer years ago to think I could dance, but that was long ago.
Well, Pat, all seriousness here, a legendary fixture in your home state of Minnesota, columnist, still Minneapolis Star Tribune since 1988. St. Paul prior to that, from 68 to 88. Not only you've been typing all these years, you're in a broadcasting hall of fame. So that shows you how kind you are to join this show.
Well, we had a radio show with Joe Soucheray that started in 1983, and
the sports show,
and a version of it is still going on. And then I had a TV show with some great characters too, but the thing with Soucheray was Monday Night Sports Talk, which is a bit of a cult hit for the first number of years, and we're not doing a podcast version of it, and it's been going on for a long time. And you know the thing about that radio money, it's just like walking in there and holding the gun up and stealing it, man. Compared to if you don't take...
Well, I got to tell you something. Podcast money is not quite that way.
No. Just trying to hook up is bad enough. But yes, it was a great. We did that for the Hubbard Company here in the Twin Cities, and they've been tremendously loyal to a couple of guys who had no idea what they were doing when they walked in.
Right? Didn't you once do the show from your swimming pool, or you used to do it while you were golfing, right?
I did a few of those, but not those would be more radio hits. We actually usually did the show in some kind of a studio, although a lot of time on the phone from the road that was done too. So.
Well, you were a pioneer for writers, breaking into the broadcast area, and heck, you're still writing, still doing podcasts. Are you still paying for that swimming pool?
Yes. In fact, I took a jump in it this morning, and and to get fired up for this podcast today. So it'd wake me up. I jumped in.
Was there any water in it?
Oh yeah, it's doing fine. It's this year the opening only cost about $2,500. We opened her up, thought things were good, but the filter's gone now. We had to get a new filter. So it's always, if you're a pool owner, you know, the drama every year is what's not working that worked last fall. And that's that.
Well, you've always said your pool is a money pit that has kept you working 2 jobs all these years, and you're still doing it.
Yes, it is. You could have had 3 more kids if I did have that pool I could have paid for. But it's, it's nice for here in Minnesota. You know, you get about a 6-week pool season, so that's fine.
Yeah, right? I mean, the rest of the time, you're like ice skating on top of it. So
you know what? I managed to live my entire life here. I tried it in my little hometown of Fulda Lake, skating a few times, took some horrible falls, and I cannot ice skate. I am a 77-year-old Minnesotan who can't ice skate. So now I grew up in southwest Minnesota where we didn't, it was big basketball country then. So
right.
We didn't really get into hockey for many years later than that. But
but the thing is, you don't know how to ice skate, but you know how to tell those who do how they should.
Yes, that's true. Although I am, my appreciation for hockey is more the characters that we've had come through it than the actual game. Because as you know, having it in Columbus, the quotes are terrible after a hockey game. They just, we either played hard enough or we didn't play hard or we didn't, once in a while you get a loose cannon who will talk in hockey, but the quotes are terrible. But we've had an incredible number of wonderful characters, starting with John Masich at the University of Minnesota. He was a goofy guy. And then Glen Sonmor was the coach for the North Stars and the Gophers and the greatest storyteller of all time, the late, great Glen Sonmor. And we still have Louis Nanny, an incredible resource. So the hockey tales are fun. It's just the actual going to a game and writing a column off it that's hard.
All right. Well, give us a Glen Sonmor story. What's your favorite about him?
Oh, what are my favorite? Well, he went into the stands when he was coaching the Gophers. He went into the stands in UMD after a guy who was tried to grab one of the stick, and he jumped. This is up in Duluth, and that's the rivalry was bitter. And he jumped into the stands, and he got his shirt torn off, and he's in the stands. And this was back in the days when hockey brawls where they'd give everybody a 2-minute penalty, after they hit each other with sticks and stuff. And Glen got back down on the bench, and he didn't have a shirt on, and he had a tie, and he had a glass eye, and he had the biggest grin on his face you've ever seen. It was the highlight of his life that he could be back fighting. When he coached the North, he coached the Fighting Saints here, the WHA team. And then he was general manager. And then he went down to Birmingham. And because as the league was going to go out of business, the WHA, he was down in Birmingham.
Because they were in Birmingham, right? I mean, hockey, that's why they went out of business.
Barons. He was coach at the Barons. And he had Frank Beaton, Steve Durbano, Gilles Bilodeau, and one of the Hansons, Dave Hansen. So he had these incredible goons. He figured the only way that he could give hockey any kind of a background in Bear Bryant country was just to brawl with everybody. And he had one photo on his wall later when he coached the North Stars. It was a sports cartoon from the Cincinnati Enquirer. They used to do sports cartoons, and they had Glen's Goons. It was the Glen's Goons. They were coming to town to play Cincinnati. And he was walking in, he had a chain over his shoulder, and he had those 4 guys all chained up coming in behind him with blood dripping off of them and everything. And it would be great to have that cartoon. And that was the most proud thing of his career.
It was like Slapshot come to life.
The Cincinnati Enquirer felt obliged to greet him. I never worked for a newspaper that did sports cartoons. Did you? The sports cartoons were...
No, I don't think. I mean, I was in Cincinnati while the Enquirer. Jerry Doling was doing those great cartoons. I think that was a fun aspect. They did a few when I worked in Columbus with some enterprise stories that I wrote, but that was only for a few years.
St. Paul and Minneapolis, but they were great when they were, of course, editorial cartoonists are some of the greatest newspaper people in the world, but we never had them in sports, which is too bad.
All right. Well, let's get back to writing. I want to hear about this. Now, I've heard this story secondhand many times, and it's about the philosophy of covering a team, and I want to get this on the record. Vikings general manager at the time, Mike Lynn, back in the day, he was a little frustrated with you, Pat, and he wanted to know what your philosophy was for covering the Vikings. What did you tell Mike Lynn?
You got to know, Lynn and I, even though he was a complete goofball, got along very well. And but I told Mike Lynn, my philosophy of covering the Vikings is when you win, I rip the other team, and when you lose, I rip you. And that was he accepted that as pretty close to the truth. But I do this thing, and we probably maybe get to it later, but I do this Turkey of the Year column, which I've been doing for like 40 years on Christmas. The only guy to ever call me up the next morning, Thanksgiving morning, and say, it's about time, was Mike Lynn. He was waiting for the honor, Mike Lynn. So I've always had but I got to tell you.
You called him the remarkable Mike Lynn.
Remarkable, yes. Right? Suchere actually gave him that nickname, Joe Suchere, right in St. Paul. But he was, we always called him Remarkable Mike. And a lot of people didn't like him because he had, the issue he had was the smirk. He couldn't wipe the smirk off his face. So it always looked like he was up to something, which he generally was.
So when you win, I rip the team you beat.
Yes.
When you lose, I rip you.
Yes, that was, but he asked the question.
I'm so glad to get this on the record. I've heard that story many times. It's one of my all-time favorite sports writing stories. It's tremendous.
Lynn was a beauty, to say the least. But I got to tell you about Lynn's revenge, right?
Okay. All right.
A couple, 3 years later, he called me up and said, hey, we got, this was like the mini camp days were on, but they didn't have those, they just had occasional tryouts. They didn't have these long, what do they call them? What are they?
Bullshit. That's what they call it. Bullshit.
And he called me up and said, hey, we got this kid. We discovered this big lineman, and he's kind of a Division II guy, but we're really excited about him. And be a good column for you, and really, really nice kid, because we give him a tryout out here, right? It's early summer. Twins aren't very good, so sure, okay. Let's
go see what the Vikings are doing.
Yeah,
sure.
He gets me. I talk to this kid. I do the column. It was his daughter's best friend's fiance. They were getting married. And basically, his present to this kid was getting me to write a column about him at the start. He had no chance to make the team. He got cut after like 20 minutes, but Lynn fed me that. And Lynn said, what do you think?
He set you up.
Now we're even. Okay.
So you were the turkey of the day, at least.
I took it hook, line, and sinker. He was doing me a favor as an old pal, but...
all is fair in war and sports writing.
Yes, that's true.
All right, you mentioned Turkey of the Year column. It is something that originated in 1978. You hand out Turkey of the Year awards every Thanksgiving. How did this idea originate?
Well, I got to tell you the truth. I was still drinking, and it was, as a drinker, a dedicated drinker, the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving is a necessity, right? And I was covering the Twins, actually, but I was writing a general interest column for the afternoon St. Paul paper on Thursdays, and then a Sunday baseball column, and then covering the team. But there was my buddies out in the town I was living in, Prior Lake, had a big, that Wednesday night turned into quite a late evening, and shooting craps in the bowling alley and doing all this nonsense. And I really didn't want to miss that by having to go to a game on Wednesday night, and I needed a Thursday column. So I lived like 20 miles from the St. Paul paper, and I'm driving in there on Wednesday morning saying, what am I going to write? What am I going to write? And all of a sudden, turkey, Thanksgiving. And it came to me, okay, I'll name a turkey of the year. And I just threw a bunch of guys in there. I think the first, here's why it worked, though. The first one was Woody Hayes. Because I went national. And a month later, Woody punched the guy from Clemson and got fired. So it looked like...
Oh, wait a minute. In Columbus, we say that Woody just, he just was patenting.
Yes.
There was no punch, right? Come on.
Yeah, just a little clothesline.
A little love tap.
A little clothesline. Anyway, so then I did it, and it was going to be a one-off. And then after Woody, and it got a big reaction, so I brought it back the next year. And the first 4 or 5 years, basically, I was using national guys, Bobby Knight, Steinbrenner, guys like that. Basically, Sid Hartman, the legendary guy, and he was at the Minneapolis paper, and I was in St. Paul. And basically, I just would name some guy that Sid loved every year, Bobby Knight or Steinbrenner. That was basically the theory.
You were just tweaking Sid.
Yeah. Then in 1983, I basically turned it into local. I said, okay, this thing's gotten completely out of hand, and we gotta have some. If we're gonna do it right, we gotta have some courage here and do it locally. And the first local winner was Paul Giel, the Gopher athletic director, who was a legendary figure and a Heisman Trophy runner-up as a football player, signed a big baseball contract, and was very popular and ineffective athletic director. And so he's the first turkey of my year on that's local, that's on a Thursday in 83. And the next day I read in Sid's column that he had bypass surgery and was in the hospital. And I never rooted for anybody to live more than I did him in my life, giving him the honor. And he did survive that. He later did die too young of a heart attack, but
yeah, you don't want to receive the Turkey of the Year awards when you're receiving last rites.
Yes, that's right, especially if you're the guy who wrote it. So anyway, that's that. And then we went from there, and made it local since then. And
and you have guys like Mike Lynn saying, "Hey, it's about time you made me a turkey."
I tried to kill it off a few times, but people. So we've had various forms of which it came back. I even gave it to myself one year. That was going to be the last one, 2017 or 18, but then it came back again. So anyway.
Why did you give it to yourself?
Oh, what did I screw up? I'd messed something up, and I think just generally speaking, once the newspaper comments started and the email started and the letters with "Give it to yourself," they did. Him and holler and yell, and it always got a big reaction. So I said, "Why not?" So
why not?
It ended up being taken way more serious by people, by the public than it should have. It was all supposed to be satirical and everything, and it ended up getting enough of a life of itself that people, would get angry about it.
Well, if you live in Minnesota, especially in the Twin Cities, you certainly know about the Turkey of the Year awards.
Here's the great thing about the Turkey of the Year, though. You can give it to some guy like Woody and then have him continue to do something really stupid and make it look like you're prophetic. But if you give it to somebody and then they do better, you can say you motivated them.
Right. Credit. You take credit.
The turkey is unbeaten. PJ Fleck, I gave it to PJ one year, and this was on Thursday, and on Friday, they beat Wisconsin Saturday, they beat Wisconsin for the first time in 14 years. And they were, why are you thinking that now? And I said, I motivated him. I made him, I gave him incentive to be a better coach. That was, it's the turkey chairman, which is what I call myself, has never been wrong. It's either It's either, yes, you were right, he's an idiot, or you motivated him. That's it. It's you can never let the public win when they're complaining about who you gave it to.
Never. You never back down.
I think one of my favorite was, you remember Tim Brewster, the great Gopher coach, Tim Brewster, who was a complete loser. He was now out there with Dion bringing in 45 transfers, and one of the craziest, just a complete incompetent as a coach. But I wrote the whole thing as though it was giving it to Brewster, but it turned out that I gave it to Charlie Weiss, Notre Dame. He had the same flaws,
He earned it.
Yeah, complete egomaniacal failure. But people were, you're really giving it to Brewster. You just said Charlie Weiss, and then Brewster. I think Brewster won it the next year.
There's a lot of layers to this Turkey of the Year thing. It's like a Russian novel. It's like something Tolstoy would have put together.
At times that it took me hours. I've made it quicker now. There's times that it took me hours to come up with, because you got to come up with a joke for everybody. It's not easy. So.
Something is creeping in, don't follow it down.
24 hours ago, I found out the person that I've been dating for the last 6 months is a con man.
That is my sister Emma. Andrew Tonks's lies had been so convincing, she'd invested $300,000 with him. However, the tables were about to turn on Andrew. What he didn't know was that Emma had discovered his real identity. But to get any chance of justice, Emma had to act like it was business as usual. Coming up in this series.
And that's when murder, all this stuff goes through my mind. I'm really, really scared.
I'm assuming Sarah has watched too much Netflix and figures I've been defrauding you. Couldn't be further from the truth.
That's what this was, a real-life story that seems so unbelievable, but it was actually true.
A true story that all starts with one simple swipe to the right. I'm Sarah Ferris.
And I'm Emma Ferris, and this is my story, Conning the Con.
Well, you mentioned Sid Hartman, and you were tweaking Sid's friends, especially early on, and you and Sid had, let's just say, a complicated relationship over the years. Sid was another legendary figure in the media world in Minnesota, lead columnist at the Star Tribune, until the day he died in 2020 at age 100.
100 and a half, and we were all surprised he died. He's the only 100-year-old ever died. We say, no, Sid, he died.
Right.
He was phenomenal in his youth. And when I first became a copy boy, he was a sports editor, 63. And back then he was a sports editor. He wrote five notes columns a week and did all kinds of radio stuff. And he was, the one guy I know I was better than on the radio was Sid. He was like, he was unbelievable, but he was a legend beyond belief. And when I got to St. Paul, I covered the preps for a couple of years, so I didn't have much to do with him. But he not only, he was the guardian of the local teams. If somebody was criticizing the local teams, he would be, he would be springing to their defense, particularly the Vikings, because he and Bud Grant were very close. And the Gophers, he loved the Gophers. That was his start. But he was gigantic in this town. I don't know who you could compare to.
Well, you said one time that Sid was instrumental in helping you develop your philosophy of covering sports.
Yes, I did the opposite. It was, I was a copy boy, and Charlie Johnson was actually the executive sports editor, crusty old guy. But he was writing columns for the afternoon Minneapolis Star, and Sid was writing the morning. I was sitting at a desk there, and these two guys, Van Brocklin, that was when 1965, when Van Brocklin lost a big game. Mm-hmm. He was Norm Van Brocklin, the Vikings coach. Lost a big game, went home, got himself full of whiskey like he usually did, and called up the next morning and said he was quitting. He was quitting as the way he'd taken this team as far as he could take them, and he was quitting. And now Charlie and Sid were sitting next to the desk on that Monday, digesting this. and they were just bad-mouthing him. Neither of them could stand him. He abused sports writers, and Ben Brocklin, he was a hard guy to get along with, and they were both bad-mouthing him. And then the next day, both of them wrote columns begging him to come back. And I said, Rennie, if I ever do this, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to, if I have an opinion, that's what I'm going to say.
Right.
So Sid helped there.
Well, Sid was known for his scoops, but he was also known for ingratiating himself with the power brokers locally, especially.
Yeah, one reason he got his scoops is he had everybody in his, he pretty well got. It's funny, he had Calvin and the twins. That was a little rocky, that relationship, but everybody else, he was, the Gophers, he was particularly protective of the Gophers.
Well, your philosophy was different. You were like, no, I'm just going to not worry about that type of relationship with anybody that I'm writing about. So you were not afraid to take on the powerful folks, especially locally.
Oh, yeah, but I did get along with a lot of people because I was not always, there was just, I just would, unlike Sid, I was not protective, and when, Smokey Joe Salem comes in as the Gopher coach and one of the nicest guys ever, but things just went completely off the rails and Sid was still trying to protect him. And when you get beat 84-13 by Nebraska, it's a little hard to sugarcoat that. So you end up writing rather nasty stuff and say it's time to go and all that, as they do anywhere in the country. It's just we had a little different approach here with Sidney than with everybody else. But hey, he was a scoop monster in his day, man. He's just in
the legendary scoop monster.
Yeah, he reported that Ara Parseghian, at the height of his success, was going to leave Notre Dame.
That was the biggest sports story in the country at that point.
That was him. And the Chicago Tribune, which covered Notre Dame like the whole team back then, and South Bend Tribune and all those papers, all those people denied it and said it was nonsense. And then he coached one more game and quit a couple of days later. And the reason Sid had the scoop is he got it from the guy who was replacing him, Dan Devine.
Right.
Dan Devine and Sid went back to when Devine was at UMD, Minnesota Duluth. And Sid and Devine were tight as could be. And Devine told Sid, and Sid gave it the Sid scoop. So
that's right, Sid. I mean, that's how, Sid had his sources and Sid had his stories and his scoops, and that's why he's a legend.
Yeah.
I regret the fact that we weren't able to have Sid on this program because, again, he was still writing at age 100.
I'm writing it. He was on the TV show we did for 20 years, the sports show. It was myself, Mike Max, who's a local guy, Sid, and Dark Star, who was this fictitious character who became, basically, we created him on Monday Night Sports Talk, and he became this guy, and he never bowed to Sid, so they fought, but it was, that was, I'm reading a thing about a young auto racer who's an heir to his father runs Starkey Hearing in town and a big company, and it reminds me of one of my favorite Sid moments, and Starkey, because Starkey Hearing, Sid had bad hearing problems, and Starkey Hearing took care of him. So every time he went out to Starkey Hearing to get a new set of, to help with his ears and stuff, he would want to give him a plug during the show. So one day he's giving Starkey Hearing this great plug, and then Mike Max says something to him, and he goes, "Huh?" It's my favorite moment. The guy was running Starkey then. So I said, if you keep giving us these plugs, you're going to put us out of business. Huh?
That's awesome.
That show was unbelievable. It was the most poorly produced show in America. It lasted for 20 years. I think one of my favorites with Sid's Hearing again is Sid and Steinbrenner were like tight, He was one of Steinbrenner's guys, and I always took cheap shots at George. Everybody in America took cheap shots at George, right?
Right.
But George and I, we're down in Tampa for a game that's going to be played at night. Sid and I, and Sid said, "You're going to breakfast with Steinbrenner." So we go out to George's hotel out there in Clearwater, and right on this side of when you go across the bay, and we had breakfast, and George was great. We were to talk for an hour and a half, and it's been fine. After that, I'd see George and say hello to him. But I was in Barcelona and covering the Olympics, and George was, that was the year George was going to fix the Olympics. Remember, he was. Oh yeah,
he was going to fix the USOC.
He was at the swimming, which they were doing outdoors. And I sat with George for like an hour watching the swimming up there. I think George liked looking at guys in swimsuits or something. I don't know. But anyway, so about 3 months later, we're on the sports show, and Sid starts yelling, and Steinbrenner came up, and Sid started, "You don't even know Steinbrenner. You never even met him." I said, "Sid, you and I had breakfast with him 6 months ago, and I sat with George and watched the swimming in Barcelona." So Sid says, "You went swimming with Steinbrenner?" Says, "You went swimming with Steinbrenner." So then I go into the Star Tribune and I get the photographer, I get one of the artists we used to have, and say, "Okay, we need a synchronized swimming thing." So we got a synchronized swimming picture of, two gals in the synchronized swimming. And then we put George and my head on them, And the next week we said, "Sid, here's the proof." That's on the show we showed. "Here's the proof that George and I went swimming together." So playing Prince on Sid was part of our existence there.
Yeah. We all miss Sid. I mean, he was such a character and such a great part of, legendary sports writer and figure in Minnesota sports history. And, we could talk for days about Sid. And again, you had a complicated relationship, but yet, you wrote his biography in 1997.
So that was always.
So it was always cool to see you guys go at it and yet also know that you were comrades in arms.
Yeah, I actually, he's, the 3 or 4 or 5 people you're going to remember when it's all over. He's in that list for sure. He's
for sure.
Because it was completely unique. And hell, at 88, you could be walking down the street with him and he'd be a block ahead of you. He was still, until his early 90s, he was in amazingly physical condition. So,
all right, Pat, you spent all these years as a columnist, but your formative years were spent as a baseball writer on the beat. From 1974 to 78, you covered the Twins as a daily beat reporter, and I think you once said that you didn't find a style of writing until you started traveling with the Twins in 74. What did you mean by that? Why did that impact you that way?
I was in town. I'd covered the preps. I was up in Duluth and St. Cloud, and boy, I was a complete novice, started at 20 years old and would use every cliche, the old sports writing cliches of, and use about 2 quotes in a story and a 50-inch story and something like that, and a lot of play-by-play and stuff. And then I did 3 years as a kind of an editor and also still covered preps and stuff. Then I got on baseball, and I love baseball. My father was big in baseball, and Fulda, Minnesota. We got that thing called Town to Ball here, and it was great. Baseball has always been my number one sport. But you'd go to, you'd start off and you'd write this routine stuff, but then you'd go to Boston and see the way the Globe did it. You'd go to other, you'd go, because you'd have to go out and buy a paper then. If you wanted to see what the other guy, you'd have to go down to the Schindler's, which was the newsstand down here, and buy out-of-town papers if you wanted to see what people were writing in the 70s. And I really was not too. I mean, once in a while, Jim Murray was syndicated, and you'd see some Red Smith stuff. But to get out and see how some guys did it on a daily basis just kind of opened my eyes. And hey, this should be fun. This should be fun, and this should be a season-long drama, a soap opera.
Yeah, this one particular game is not apocalyptic. It was one out of 162.
You find that out.
Right.
And,
right.
Of course, now, and with the social media and everything, we're back to every 162 games, all of them being a crisis. But
right.
But it was kind of a season-long narrative it became. And the first couple of years, they weren't real good, but then we got Mauch in here as a manager, and he was like a central figure of
Gene Mauch, right?
About him. The quotes were always great as long as you waited, but with Mauch, you had to know he was forming his answer, and a lot of people get anxious and wait for it, and it took me a while to learn. Wait 40 seconds, you're going to get a great quote. I'll tell you how good Mauch is. And do you guys use obscenities in here?
Yeah, go ahead. They're cheap.
Okay. So 76, remember the Phillies that's the first time the Phillies popped back up, I think 76.
Since their big collapse in 64 when he was the manager.
He was the manager.
Right. Gene Mauch.
So
right.
And now, if you remember the Phillies, this is when only 4 teams went to the playoffs, 2 in each league, obviously. And Phillies... we're doing it again. Remember early in 76, maybe September 10th, September 12th, all of a sudden they'd lost a bunch. And it looked like they were collapsing. So Mauch, you got to do the story. You got to get Gene there. But the Twins played nothing but afternoon games in September every year. And they drowned 2,000, 3,000 a game back then. And I went out there early, and they were taking early batting practice, and he was standing out in the grass, a ways away from the batting cage. And I came up and made some small talk, but the purpose was to talk about the Phillies.
Right.
And I finally said, Gene, what do you remember about the 64 Phillies? Or what do you remember about what happened to the 64 Phillies? And he was smoking a cigarette, as always. And he went, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 40 seconds. He throws a cigarette in the grass and stops it out and says, only every fucking pitch. And then he went for a half hour, and I'm writing as fast as I could. I never asked him another question. So it was, that was the kind of guy he was. Out-of-town writers, a lot of them had a hard time, but those old guys from Philly all loved him, and I could never figure out why until Frankie Dolson and those guys loved him.
Yeah, I mean, you were studying the craft, right, as a young writer. You're learning by reading other writers. Yes. You're learning from a guy like Gene Mauch.
Yeah.
I mean, you even learned how to travel, right, from Halsey Hall, the radio guy?
Yeah,
I mean, didn't he teach you something?
Halsey was my...
Halsey Hall taught you something about traveling.
Halsey was this incredible character that was... he was with the Twins, I think, their first 14 years on the broadcast. But before that, he was a sports writer and a radio guy. He was on the Gopher broadcast. And he covered the Millers for years, the Minneapolis Millers, the ball club. Sometimes they said... And he also was on the WCCO radio was this giant, and they did a newscast every night at from 10 to 10:30. Even once TV showed up, they were huge. But Halsey did the sports, and sometimes Halsey would do his 10:20 sports hit. This one he had a 1 in the morning deadlines, so he'd go to the game, go do his sports. Sometimes he'd start drinking and forget to write his story. So they had to track him down, or somebody else had to put it together or something. But he was this great character, but legendary cheap guy too. Like a lot of guys from the Depression was legendary cheap. So he used to bring this valise onto the Twins flights because we flew with the Twins, and they'd make your arrangements, and then the paper would reimburse them. And he got his valise, and it'd be 3 jugs in there, and it would be 3 bottles of gin. He loved gin, but he didn't want to pay hotel prices, so he brought them with him. And I'd say, Halsey, you get free drinks on the airplane. Everybody's got drinks. He says, I said, what do you bring your own booze for? He says, Patty, my boy, you never know when you're going to run into a local election. He was a great, very smart guy, great guy.
Well, that was a good lesson for a young writer on the road, right?
I only was with him 1 year, but he was so much fun. It was great.
Well, you saw some great Twins players those years. Larry Heisel, Rod Carew, Lyman Bostock. Lyman Bostock is a guy that people forget about. What a great player he was. Tragically was murdered at age 27. Yeah. I think you used to call him Jibber Jabber, right?
Well, not me so much. He used to call me Poison Pen, but we got along great. He was a great, Rodney was, Rodney and I got along great, but he was grumpy. He was moody. Rodney
Carew,
and Heisel was quiet, but Bostock couldn't stop talking. And, but that 77 team, they could score thousands of runs. Pitching was terrible. But that was Lyman's last year. And we didn't, St. Paul paper didn't go to California, Anaheim for a 3-game road trip one time. Mm-hmm. And so I wasn't with him. I get a call at 6 o'clock in the morning at home, and it's Lyman. And Lyman had talked to the LA Times and ripped the Twins, right? Mm-hmm. Ripped the Twins about being cheap and the fans, the fans, they don't support us and blah, blah. Actually, they were drawn pretty well that year. But he was a very sensitive guy, and he called me up and says, Poison, you got to help me out here. I didn't say any of that stuff. I didn't say you got to write something. And I said, Lyman, you said it all, but what do you want me to? They didn't make it up, Lyman, but what do you want me to say? So Lyman tells me, blah, I love the fans, blah, blah, blah. So I crank out a piece for the afternoon paper to help him, hopefully. But unfortunately for him, the St. Paul Dispatch never got across the river. It didn't. I don't know if the fans didn't get on him anyway. There weren't enough fans worrying about it, the St. Paul paper in the first place. But that's the kind of guy he was. And last time, in '78, the Angels were in town,
right?
Late in September, and I went down and talked to him for a while. But then he's leaving, and I'm at the other hall. I'm leaving the Twins clubhouse, and he's down at the other end, and he yelled at me, "Hey, Poison, be nicer to my buddies," because he had some of his, Willie Norwood and some of his other friends were now the Twins outfielders, and they were not doing too well. And I said, all right, see ya. And they came back, went down to Gary, Indiana. I went down to Chicago and went to see his relatives in Gary, Indiana, and got shot to death.
Yeah, it's tragic, yeah.
Riding in the car was a bad... I did a 10-year anniversary piece on that. That was talked to the uncle who was with him in the car, and that was a terrible thing because he was a great guy. A great player too. Going to be a hell of a player.
Well, he gave you a good name, Poison. I love that name. Poison. Now that's a nickname for a sports writer. And if you're talking to Poison, well, you just let the tape roll. So we did. Make sure to join us in a couple weeks for part 2 of our conversation with Patrick Reusse.
Thanks for listening to Press Box Access. You can find us here with a new episode every other Wednesday. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe and follow us on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcast app. We'd love for you to review us. 5 stars would be nice. Follow us on social media. Drop us an email at pressboxaccess@gmail.com. And be sure to spread the word. Everyone is welcome here. This has been a production of Evergreen Podcast. A special thank you to executive producers Michael D'Aloia and Gerardo Orlando, producer Bill Huffman, and our audio engineer Nathan Corson. I'm your host, Todd Jones. It's closing time. Rock on.
Something is creeping in, don't follow it down.
24 hours ago, I found out the person that I've been dating for the last 6 months is a con man.
That is my sister Emma. Andrew Tonks's lies had been so convincing, she'd invested $300,000 with him. However, the tables were about to turn on Andrew. What he didn't know was that Emma had discovered his real identity. But to get any chance of justice, Emma had to act like it was business as usual. Coming up in this series.
And that's when murder, all this stuff goes through my mind. I'm really, really scared.
I'm assuming Sarah has watched too much Netflix and figures I've been defrauding you. Couldn't be further from the truth.
That's what this was, a real-life story that seems so unbelievable, but it was actually true.
A true story that all starts with one simple swipe to the right. I'm Sarah Ferris.
And I'm Emma Ferris, and this is my story, Conning the Con.